Great. Yeah, I see we have a decent amount of attendees, so thank you very much. So welcome everyone. Hello. On behalf of Health Action International, thank you very much for joining this webinar looking into the case of CAR T-cell therapy. Just a couple of quick points before we start. As you can see, the webinar is being recorded. So Health Action International, we will disseminate this recording somewhere next week. We'll keep you informed. Secondly, as it's a webinar, I definitely want to encourage anyone who has questions, our moderator or our great panelists, to use the Q&A function throughout. And yes, really want to encourage you to join in. And yeah, so I think we're ready. I'm going to introduce you to our moderator. I'll give the floor to Michele Catanzaro, our moderator. Michele is a journalist and lecturer in science journalism at the Autonomous University of Barcelona and holds a PhD in physics. Michele has written for a range of different outlets and also has carried out investigative research on the pricing of innovative drugs. So thank you so much, Michele, for moderating, and I now give you the floor. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alice. Thanks for having me. So when I was asked to moderate this webinar, name immediately came to my mind. The name is Ariana Benedé. She was a girl based here in Barcelona, where I live. Unfortunately, she died of leukemia. But before dying, she was very active in setting up a foundation that raised funds to carry out an anti-cancer therapy, to develop an anti-cancer therapy in a public hospital here in Barcelona. In fact, the therapy succeeded. I mean, it was a really altruistic move because she knew the therapy wouldn't be ready for her, but it succeeded, it is effective, and it costs 1/3 of the equivalent commercial therapies. This therapy is a CAR T therapy. I think everybody that has signed up to the webinar know about them, but just let me remind you that these are therapies in which you take cells from a patient, you modify them, you bring them back in the patient, and you use the immune system of the patient to target cancer. And they have been the object of the 2018 Nobel Prize in Medicine and Physiology. You know, I'm telling you this story because it brings together a lot of the issues that we will discuss in this webinar. One important detail, for example, is that this therapy could be developed in the public sector thanks to a legal framework, the hospital exemption, which is now challenged by the European Union, which may be in fact deleted by the European Union, not allowing to repeat this success story. So Ariana chose a not mainstream way, okay? She bet for the public sector, while a lot of the innovation is often delivered by the private sector. What we will tackle in this debate is precisely this conundrum. When you have publicly funded medical research that leads to successful health technology, that, however, fail to prioritize global access due to issues like, for example, very high price and other aspects. CAR Ts are a very interesting case studies because we are seeing live these potential two different ways, a commercial development in the private sector and another one in the public sector. And so they show that different ways are of a different way of doing things is possible with respect to the current mainstream. And we will discuss in this webinar how to enhance, to defend this possible different way. So as Alice has said, this webinar is sponsored by Health Action International, but it is also part of a process to develop a coalition called Public Pharma for Europe. It is a coalition in the making. It is not already established, but there are over 10 organizations that have joined together, joint effort to develop this project. So in order to talk about this very interesting and really vital topic, we have three great speakers: Sarai Kistra of University Allied for Essential Medicine, Adriana Alonso Ruiz, Research and Advocacy Manager at the Spanish NGO Salud por Derecho, and Stephanie Michaud, President and CEO of the Biocan RX company. So I remind you that you can use the Q&A tool to post your questions. I will make sure to voice them. But let's start with the speakers. So first of all, Sarai Kistra, as I said, University Allied for Essential Medicine. She's a medical anthropologist by training. She has a PhD in epidemiology and data science and science in Netherlands. She has been active in other organizations beyond the one she is now, like, for example, the People's Health Movement, WHO Watch. And she's interested in how to apply principle of global health equity through the research process. So, Sarai, the stage is yours.
Hi, thanks so much for the invitation. Just to correct that, I'm still a student actually, so I'm doing my PhD and I'm studying medicine. And for me, the story of the CAR T cells is quite a personal one. So I used to be a very science-interested teenager, and my uncle has been working in CAR T cell development for over a decade. So I've been really following what's happening from the start. And also one of my first patients when I entered the clinic for the first time was a man in his early 60s who told me that he would not be alive if it was not for being enrolled in a very special trial involving CAR T cells. Just to explain the situation a little bit for us in the Netherlands. So it used to be the case that if you wanted to treat a patient with CAR T cells, this was only possible for non-Hodgkin lymph node cancer. And at that stage, what you'd have to do is you had to harvest the cells from the patient, then freeze it, then send it to the United States where they would modify the cells in the lab. Then they would freeze them again, they would fly them back, and then they would be administered to the patient in the Netherlands. And as you can hear, this is quite a long process. So this also meant that there was quite a lot of delays for patients to access these treatments. And during this waiting period, a lot of our patients would deteriorate to a point where sometimes they weren't even eligible to receive the treatment anymore. And also in the clinics, we have several stories of patients either changing their mind, or once we had a nurse who accidentally opened the wrong valve and then the whole package of cells were lost, which means that then you have to wait for another 6 weeks. So in the Netherlands, they decided that they had to think of the patient perspective first. And for that reason, the UMC Groningen in 2020 started its own CAR T cell production care line. And this was a 6-year research program that is funded by the government. It involves 299 patients. And the goal was to produce the CAR T cells in an academic hospital and to compare to the originator product is Carta. And the originator product is actually provided by the insurers. And for the patient, it has the following gains. It has the quicker access to the cells. It means that you don't have to go through the freezing and thawing, and you don't have to use the freezing and thawing agent for that, which also means less nausea for the patient. So it really improves the patient experience. However, there's also considerable gains for the healthcare system. It will save about 250,000 euros per patient, as the estimate cost of public production will be about 80,000 euros. This means that also the government has an interest in this and why they're supporting this. And once the program is finished, the Zorg Instituut Nederland will evaluate the effectiveness of it and whether it will come under the basic insurance package. Also, the Netherlands is now involved in a European subsidy called InnoCAR-T, which I think you'll hear about later in this webinar. However, I'm here on behalf of Universities IAD for Essential Medicines, and I wanted to give some of a global context to what our beliefs are around this topic. And currently, the high cost and complex manufacturing processes associated with CAR T therapies pose significant barriers to access, particularly in low and middle income countries. And we believe that public pharma initiatives such as Public Pharma for Europe can help bridge this gap by promoting equitable technology transfer to local manufacturers, thereby decentralizing production and making them more accessible worldwide. And as this trial that I was talking about earlier in particularly is taking place at a university hospital, we think that universities have a moral duty to engage with this equitable technology transfer to public entities and widely share the lessons learned so they don't stay limited to the Netherlands. Particularly as UAM, we believe that universities have such a moral duty to make decisions on what research to share and how to share it, on the principle of global health equity, which is defined as that people's needs rather than social privileges should guide the distribution of opportunities for well-being. So we really try and take ownership of what our universities and our hospitals do. And we think that this is a great opportunity to encourage our doctors and our researchers and our professors to really think more about equitable technology transfer. So in the case of CAR T cells, this means that public pharma should be in the driver's seat and direct efforts towards this knowledge transfer and apply the lessons learned from here in Groningen. We know that the WHO has already eased biosimilar requirements, which makes it much easier to share technical know-how without having to repeat the whole trial again against the originator product. But both the EMA and the FDA have, as far as I know, not yet eased their biosimilar guidelines to make it easier for facilities elsewhere to learn from the knowledge that we're accumulating here in the Netherlands and set up their own local production of CAR T cells. And we think this aspect of equitable technology transfer is really important, as otherwise we risk inequities between countries regarding access to widen again. So we are very strong in favor of protecting local production at university hospitals in Europe and protecting, therefore, the hospital exemption clause in the ongoing update of the European pharmaceutical legislation. And that was our contribution.
Thanks a lot, Sarai. You have touched upon a lot of very interesting aspects. So just a couple of highlights. I mean, these are really frontline therapies, very innovative, being developed in the public sector at costs that you could see are, one order of magnitude lower than the ones that you get from commercial products, which is one of the parameters, well, the important parameters in terms of access. And then you have touched upon the whole issue of technology transfer, the new regulation of biosimilars that in principle should make it easier to develop biosimilar drugs, but we will see how it will roll out. But anyway, let's go to the next speaker, Adrián Alonso Ruiz, a research and advocacy manager of Salud por Derecho. He studied pharmacy at Madrid's Complutense University. He has a master in global health from Barcelona's Institute for Global Health, is global. He's an independent consultant on access to drugs. He has worked, among other, from the Dutch nonprofit Access to Medicine Foundation, Geneva's Global Health Center, and currently he works at Salud por Derecho. So the stage is yours, Adrián. Please unmute.
I'm muted. Yeah, sorry. 4 years into after the COVID started, and I'm still muting myself in the meetings. Anyway, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you to the organizers and to all the panelists for being here today. I'm very happy to be able to talk about this issue, which is very timely, considering, as Sarai was saying, the current negotiations of the pharmaceutical legislative package in Europe. But before starting, I wanted to acknowledge the contributions of some of my colleagues, present and former colleagues. First and foremost, Jaime Manzano and Vanessa López from Salud por Derecho, Irene Bernal, former colleague at Salud por Derecho as well, and my previous colleagues at the Global Health Center that basically allowed me to study this issue of CAR T therapy and contributed immensely to generate knowledge on this issue. Suri Moon, Marcela Vieira, Julia Slovensky, Caitlin Larch, Erika Sinabargar. And now, piggybacking on what Michele was saying, some or many of you would be or might be familiar with the case of RE1, the first CAR T therapy that was developed in Europe by Hospital Clínic of Barcelona, authorized by the Spanish regulator in 2021. It's been highlighted by many advocates and followed by media for the low price of this therapy. It's, as Michele was saying, 1/3 of comparable CAR T therapies from the industry, but also because it was developed, as Michele was saying, in a public hospital. However, I wanted to dedicate a bit of time to explain the difference between the approval through the hospital exemption and what the hospital exemption is, before discussing some of the lessons learned from this case and the implications for the concept of public pharma in Europe. The hospital exemption clause is a regulatory pathway that is unique to the EU regulatory landscape that allows hospitals to produce and administer custom-made advanced therapeutic products for individual patients on a non-routine basis. These therapies have to be authorized by national regulators and are exempted from the normal regulatory process, centralized regulatory process at the European Medicines Agency. So when a product is being approved through the hospital exemption clause, it doesn't have an authorization to commercialize the product. It has an authorization to use it on an individual patient in a specific hospital. These are two different concepts. In Spain, because this is a directive, each member state in Europe has a different interpretation of the norm, of the rule, sorry. And in Spain, the interpretation includes a temporary approval of 3 years, I believe, and that it's renewable. And it sets some requirements to provide preclinical, clinical evidence, traceability and pharmacovigilance plans, as well as the requirement to set good manufacturing practice standards and inspections that basically set up the regulatory requirements at the same level of what it would be required for a normal pharmaceutical company product or the traditional regulatory process. Now, what we've learned in studying the process of developing RE1 was basically that we could say that Hospital Clinic acted under 3 different logics. They are first a hospital, part of the national healthcare system. They are also a research center, and they are also a drug developer. It's I don't know, like the Holy Spirit. It's 3 in 1. And this has certain implications, both positive and negative. Starting with the positive is that as part of the national healthcare system, it's greatly influenced by the principles of the Spanish healthcare system, which is basically equity, accessibility, and universality. And this can be seen in the lower price, as we were discussing before, but also on a desire from the doctors that developed the treatment to treat as many patients as possible in Spain, in Europe, and globally. As a research center, the developers basically acted under norms in the scientific community, and they were able to share and acquire knowledge and technology in a very open way. Basically, it allowed doctors from Barcelona to travel to the US and learn how to develop the treatment, but also to share their experience and their technology with other developers in different countries, which is, as you might imagine, completely different from the traditional way of doing pharmaceutical product development. As a drug developer, however, the hospital counted with 2 things. The first one is in-house regulatory expertise and the hospital exemption clause. And what this means is by having regulatory expertise and because of having at their availability this regulatory pathway, they were able to comply with regulatory standards that I was explaining before and use the hospital exemption as a stepping stone towards centralized approval at the EMA, which is the state in which they are right now, looking for centralized approval in Europe. So this looks like something almost perfect, right? We have a product developer that is able to set very affordable prices or more affordable prices, definitely able to and willing to share knowledge and technology, and that follows regulatory standards that are at the same level as industrial standards. But this is not perfect, and as I was saying, this has benefits and poses some barriers as well. And when we have a hospital developing drugs, it means that there might be situations in which there is a lack of institutional capacity to develop industrial and commercial strategies. And let's not forget that we are asking healthcare practitioners to become CEO, CFO, COO, quality control officers, regulatory officers, and production officers, all at the same time while keeping the clinical practice, the day-to-day life of a doctor or a pharmacist in a hospital. And this is obviously a barrier to expand production and R&D. As a research center, they are also restricted by academic funding. And if there is any academic in the room, they will know how competitive and limited academic funding can be. But also in pharmaceutical development, academic funding, definitely in Europe, doesn't cover regulatory and late clinical stage expenses, which means that the hospital struggled a lot to access this funding and be able to fund the current stages of development. When acting as a drug developer, what happens when you have a hospital operating as a drug developer is that basically you face a lot of the lack of political support, and people from the hospital clinic has many times faced pressure from policymakers claiming that they're not a pharmaceutical company and therefore they shouldn't be doing what they were doing, that this is, and I'm quoting here, this is not Cuba and therefore we shouldn't be developing drugs in a public space, and so on and so forth. But it also means that we have a hospital that is also not completely transparent about the R&D expenses and pricing process, and that it doesn't have a global health, global access plan as part of the key structure. And I'm closing with this slide, concluding that public development of CAR T therapies is definitely possible, and the case of RE1 is one a success story, definitely. However, the lack of political support and coordination and limited funding can pose challenges to create a sustainable business model for these hospitals, not only in Spain, but also in the Netherlands or France or across Europe in general. There is still a lot of uncertainty on the strategy to reach commercialization and access even within Europe if the product gets approved by the European Medicines Agency. And as those therapies developed in the private sector, equitable global access, transparency are still not included by design in this innovation model. So with a few conclusions on the concept of public pharma, which are basically my personal learnings from this case study, is basically that public pharma should be a means to an end, right? It's not about being public pharma for the sake of being public, and we should avoid state-owned if there are other solutions that can be as optimal or even better to orient the R&D system towards satisfying public health needs. And there are plenty of examples from global health that show non-profit options to deliver new therapies. And two more things. The first one is that public should be understood not as a national public, but as a global public, as Sarai was saying before. It should be globally accessible and equitably accessible, definitely, going beyond nationalistic approaches to R&D solutions. And the need to turn norms and formal norms, such as the ones that I explained before, into rules, and access, affordability, and equity should be built in by design, taking advantage of the current negotiations in Europe. And
thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Adrian. Yes,
thank you.
Thanks for your, I mean, you have really sketched a checklist of things that people should take into account on this path towards public pharma, ranging from, having specialized people on board, having a strategy, having funding for late clinical stages, a global perspective, etc. We will have time. I remind you that you can post your questions in the question and answer box, and after the round of presentation, which is includes one more presentation, I will pose them to the speakers. So the third speaker is Stéphanie Michaud, President and CEO of Biocan RX, not-for-profit that seeks to accelerate the delivery of innovative immunotherapies from the bench to the bedside. She has more than 20 years of experience in public, government, and private sector in research and innovation. And the outlook, the strategy is creating a partnership between government, not-for-profits, academia, and industry to maximize the impact of research funded by the Biocan RX network on the lives of those affected by cancer. So the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the invitation to participate. The previous presentations were absolutely outstanding and incredibly informative and inspiring. My name is Stéphanie Michaud. I'm the CEO and president of Biocan RX, as mentioned, a not-for-profit, and we invest in the development of immunotherapies for the clinic. We have been in existence since 2015, and we are fully funded by the Government of Canada. And as I like to define, our mandate really has been, up until a few years ago, to live in that valley of death. So where we have a finding in research, where we are trying to develop it and bring it to the clinic. And, this has been, the constraints under which we have lived. In 2016, we have an annual conference, and we had heard a fantastic talk from some researchers in the United States, talking about all of the different types of CAR Ts that they were making, being able to offer to their patients. And our researchers in Canada and clinicians were, just to be honest, a little bit depressed, because in Canada, even if someone had a CAR T that they wished to manufacture and then offer to patients via clinical trial, there was no possibility to even make that, as we didn't have the manufacturing capability to do this. And so a group of clinicians and researchers in the network got together in order to bring on this kind of manufacturing capability. And as everybody on this call knows, Canada is a very large country. And the way that we invest in manufacturing production and different types of facilities is usually highly distributed in a vast area of the country. So we brought together all of those essential pieces, of course, including plasmid production, GMP lentiviral manufacture, and point of care manufacturing. And we really think that this is the way to go for Canada because of our significant geography. And it took us 2 years and to be able to bring this kind of capability online, but we did. And within 2 years, we had this manufacturing capability open, and Tandem had collaborated with patients and researchers in order to elaborate a patient-informed clinical trial protocol and open this Made in Canada CAR T program that was a CD19 CAR T. Now, all of this took place before Canada gained access to commercially available product. Those of you who haven't lived in Canada, people hear that we have a single payer system, when in actual fact, we have essentially 10 different healthcare systems. And so when the commercial products became available, there was an immense amount of inequity across the country, in that certain provinces reimbursed the commercial product and other provinces did not. And so in opening this clinical trial, we had many, many requests, of course, as you would imagine, from provinces where this product was not being reimbursed, or for patients that fell outside of the category for reimbursement in a given province. And so to date, from opening up this trial to now, we have treated over 80 patients in Canada, operating in 2 clinical sites across the country, one in Vancouver and one in Ottawa, and the results have been very impressive. To quote the movie Bull Durham, if you build it, they will come. Being able to have this manufacturing capacity in Canada has meant that researchers have begun to elaborate new CAR Ts. And so what we've seen and what have entered our research program are brand new CAR Ts, for example, targeting ultra-rare sarcomas, CD22 CAR Ts, and also the opportunity for collaboration from individuals outside the country, where we can now import technologies and new CAR Ts, and also us collaborating with countries in Europe, where we're able to send our CD19 product to other countries, and they themselves can run their own CAR T program. So of course, I'm speaking here a lot about research, about that preclinical to clinical phase. And what you have here on this slide is our ultimately desired approach for how we wish to see CAR T delivered across the country. And we are working towards achieving this, having these sites operational across the country. They're all in various stages of approaching being able to manufacture product. But right now at this time, our lentiviral vector is made in Ottawa, and then this is shipped to Victoria in British Columbia, where the actual CAR T cell products are made and then distributed either to Vancouver or shipped back to Ottawa in order to be administered to the patients. Like my colleague here in the Netherlands, the products, there is no freezing of these products. And the clinicians, I would agree with you with respect to the overall benefit, also obvious clear benefit with respect to reduced manufacturing times, because as I'm sure has happened in Europe, obtaining a manufacturing slot in a commercial product is a real issue, because we too in Canada, when we collect the cells, have to ship them over the border to the United States and then have these shipped back. And the manufacturing slots are not always available, and it takes up to 6 weeks to be able to obtain the product. So we've had all of these great results in Canada, and of course, people are asking us what is next, and our researchers are asking us, what are you going to be able to do with this? In Canada, we do not have a hospital exemption pathway, and so all of the issues that have been noted by Adrian with respect to moving forward with a marketing authorization are very much applicable to us as well. Questions around funding, questions around experience and expertise, which in Canada has really been under the remit of the pharmaceutical and the biotechnology industry. That being said, there is an enormous amount of interest by our government, by provincial governments, in us being able to, push on this and to attempt a way to push this forward and to make these kinds of products available to the Canadian ecosystem. And we see the CD19 product as being the one that will forge that path, because being an immunotherapy network, investing in different types of research, we have a lot of different candidates that would be amenable to a new pathway as well. So I'd like to leave, these are some of the new products, but I'd like to leave you with a photo of one of the patients that have been treated on our CD19 CAR-T. This is Camille Leahy. She's a single mom. This is a picture of her attending a ball game with her daughter. Camille had ALL. She's 3.5 years post-treatment now, with no signs of recurrence of disease. And we're incredibly pleased and happy for her, and she's been an incredible advocate for us at BioCanRx. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Stephanie. It's very interesting to see this large-scale operation, in fact, and also how it shares some of the challenges found by people elsewhere in the world in very different settings. So this is interesting, and it's also, let's say, hopeful, because it shows that there are maybe some points in which the whole community that is interested in this topic can work on to improve the situation. So we have plenty of questions. There was a couple for Sarai by Dis Gotham and Bittringer on this 80,000 euros per patient cost. She posted in the comment box a link that explains how this price is built. Maybe one detail, Sarai, somebody was asking, yes, this was asking, what is the leading factor of this cost? Is it labor cost? Is it equipment? Is it consumable? Why it is still so expensive, let's say?
Yes, so I actually don't know exactly what is driving the cost. This is the cost estimate that the hospital itself gives, but this was also the cost estimate that they gave when they initiated the trial. So I can imagine that it's now 4 years later that there's been some bit of a learning curve. So I think it's something that we will follow up with as UAM to create transparency in the cost that this hospital is experiencing, so we can compare the efficiency to other places as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Then there were a couple of questions also from these. He was that were posted very quickly about the IP situation of CAR-T therapies. So the question was whether it's substance patents or method of use patents. First question. And then a broader one, which is, what are the methods of maintaining monopolies for CAR-T therapies apart from patents? For example, the person that posed the question says, I remember there was a mention that for some CAR-T therapies, the pharma companies would own the lab where the T cells are modified. So who wants to comment on the IP situation?
I mean, I can quickly. We didn't do a a patent analysis on this. I know that there's some researchers in Colombia working on this issue, and happy to put this in contact with you, with them. What I heard from the team in the hospital in Barcelona was basically that these are still barriers, and they have to do a freedom to operate analysis in order to be safe. So patents are still a problem, definitely. When it comes to the methods to maintaining monopolies, the first one is most of these therapies are approved in Europe for rare diseases, to treat rare diseases, and so they benefit of first the market exclusivity and data protection policies available to all new products in Europe, but also to the orphan drug designation incentives in Europe. So that's one way of keeping the monopoly, and that's actually one of the points that they want to modify through the hospital exemption, through the negotiations of the EU legislative package, is to not being able to use the hospital exemption to maintain the monopolies to avoid competition.
Okay, two more questions for Adrian, since you are there, so you don't mute you. So one from Bittringer. Are there trials to establish international coordination of CAR-T producing hospitals? With 20 million euros per year, would this be a breakthrough? And the other question for you from Ansela Santos is, do you know how helpful it is being for hospital clinic to be in the EMA's PRIME scheme? So whether there is coordination and whether the PRIME scheme is helping, Adrian.
I think there is a lot of informal coordination among researchers, and I'm sure that Stephanie can give more info on that. There's no like a coordination mechanism in Europe that puts everyone in contact, but it's a small academic field, and so everybody knows each other, I'm sure. Regarding clinical trials, there's very recently the Dutch Cancer Foundation granted hospital clinic, I can't remember the amount, but basically gave them the money to do a clinical trial, multi-country clinical trial in Europe. So it's 5 countries to reach the EMA approval stage.
Okay, and then there was this question on the PRIME scheme of the European Medical Agency.
I'm sure that they find, I wouldn't know how to answer. I'm sure that they find it relevant and useful, but I wouldn't know how useful it would be.
Okay. Then a question for Stephanie, or do you want to comment, Stephanie?
Yes, I just want to comment with respect to collaboration. I think what we're seeing now, and certainly we have frequent conversations with colleagues in Spain and Denmark, in the Netherlands, with respect to their activities, not just in CAR-T, but in, for example, tumor-infiltrating lymphocytes, or TILs, which are cells that are taken from a patient's tumor and used as a medicine. And so conceptually, it's very similar to a CAR-T, and one would say very amenable to being developed in a hospital setting. But there is significant alignment between researchers and with clinicians from these countries, also in the United States, examining other ways of being able to provide these products, and I would say a very high degree of collaboration. So it's a building, it's a good network already that's been established, and there is a lot of exchange of ideas and information about how to move these products forward.
Okay, so one more question for you, Stephanie. Does your organization plan to publish costs of development and manufacture of your CAR-T products? These costs,
absolutely, yes.
Okay, yes. The comment by this is, these cost questions are, I imagine, quite a big fear for some hospitals, and I imagine transparency in this could be helpful.
Yes, so we in the grant applications that we received, information that we sent to other researchers that are trying to estimate how much this will cost, conversations with provinces, we're very transparent, and I've actually listed the approximate cost currently for our manufacturing process, what it costs us to produce. There was a question a little bit earlier on about monopoly, and a question about monopoly as it relates to manufacturing. One of the reasons why these products are so expensive is that they have to be made under GMP conditions. And what this means is that there are extensive quality systems in place and specialized laboratories with specialized ventilation and tools, equipment, and people, an enormous amount of people, because there's an enormous amount of validation and documentation that needs to be carried out in order to be releasing these products. So that and the consumables, the equipment does bring up the cost. But that being said, we're able to make these products right now from $80,000 to $120,000 Canadian.
Okay. Some of you have mentioned pressures from, the pharmaceutical industry. So there's a question on this. There was at least one, but maybe now it has been delayed, about what was the reaction of the medical or the pharmaceutical industry to these projects. Anybody wants to comment?
I don't mind commenting. I think originally that there was a lot of resistance from the pharmaceutical companies with respect to these types of technologies coming online. And not technologies, but the fact that the academic sector was making a push and beginning to occupy this space. That being said, a lot of the developments in new CAR-Ts really do come from the academic space. And I think that there needs to be a bridge between, because pharma will always be here. And I'm a firm believer that that there's room for many different ways to deliver products to patients that need them. The pharmaceutical industry does great work and will continue to do great work and continue to offer products. What we wish to support is different pathways to maximize access. And that will have to be the reality that we deal with, and is that new players are going to emerge on the scene. And I think that there's plenty of room for everybody, because the access issues that we are confronted with now and into the future will only grow, as will the number of different types of technologies that our patients will need and which our clinicians will want to offer to those patients. We'll need different ways to be able to deliver these products.
I encourage you to check the chat, because a lot of interesting links are being posted. I have a question myself. That is, Adrian has drawn a little bit, let's say, a wish list of actions that should be done to scale up these efforts, okay, to transform them from some anecdotal individual effort from a single hospital to something that could really go towards the direction of mass production in public pharma. If you had to tell me, each one of you, let's say 1, 2 actions that would help this scaling up, or that you would like, that are on your wish list, which ones would you highlight? Yes, please take, okay. Anybody.
I can. I'm just gonna explain a bit what the hospital in Barcelona has done so far, up to what I know. What they have in mind and what they have tried to do is set up some kind of license practices. For example, if I'm not mistaken, in 2020, they reached an exclusive license agreement with an Indian company, Immunil Therapeutics, to commercialize the product in India. And this was in a moment where there was no CAR-T therapy available in the country. So that was one of the strategies that the hospital had in mind. The license is not available, the text is not available, but Immunil, the company that licensed the product, commits to sell it at an affordable price, but it's not clear how this will happen. And second, if there's a wish list, to me, maybe it's not super radical, but definitely the involvement of other actors in global health, such as the Medicines Patent Pool, would greatly expand access to these therapies beyond the global north. But yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, by the way, a curious fact about this partnership with the Indian company is that one of the people involved is Siddhartha Mukherjee. Maybe you know, is this very famous doctor that has published books, and he was involved in the launching on this company. Okay, Sarai, Stephanie, maybe you've turned on your mic.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
Please, Stephanie, and then Sarai can. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Just with respect to expansion into the global south, I know of, and we are collaborators with this not-for-profit known as Caring Cross out of the United States, which have launched a number of different programs in South America. And are looking for a very innovative means of being able to deliver GMP products in areas of low resource. And it involves technology transfer, education, and complete training of the individual so that groups are able to make their own products. So it's very much enabling so that others can begin the manufacture of their own products themselves. And activities such as these I applaud. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's a different model with respect to the one taken by the clinic. So you don't necessarily need to partner with a company. You can also partner with a not-for-profit partner, so a different option. Sarai?
Yeah, building on that, I think that collaboration is really important here, and that we try and collaborate with as many public and socially oriented organizations as possible, and that the new ethics also to bring down costs of pharmaceutical products should not necessarily be around generic competition even, or biosimilar competition in this case, but really about collaboration and sharing best practices to make the whole production experience the most efficient one. And within that, I think that equitable technology transfer is very, very important. And I think it's not on the radar of a lot of academic hospitals, especially in the global north. So with UAM, we have been looking into UK universities, what they did during COVID, and if any universities, for example, engage with the mRNA transfer hubs as a place of learning around another type of health technology. And we see that universities don't really understand that this is even a question and that they could contribute to these kind of learning hubs. So I think that there should be more responsibility taken by universities and academic hospitals to really share the knowledge that they are acquiring through these kind of trials, and make sure that, collaboration over competition in this case, for sure.
The last two interventions have touched upon this very important issue of technology transfer. If I can share a personal story, for example, during the pandemics, journalists were told, oh, the waiver of the COVID vaccine is useless because nobody would be able to produce them in the global south. They would not have the capability. Technology transfer would be a big obstacle. And then you get things like, for example, Immunil or the not-for-profit that Stephanie was mentioning that are managing, in fact, to help people in developing countries to develop very complex and elaborated therapies. So it seems that technology transfer is not so difficult in itself. So any comments on that? I mean, how can we effectively promote technology transfer to developing countries?
I mean, honestly, if I can just say one tiny thing that isn't necessary, because I've never done the process itself, so I also don't know how difficult it really is to make CAR T-cell therapies. But what I see is that there's a lot of very outdated beliefs out there about the kind of technical capacities that labs have in the global south. And it has to do a lot with racism and discrimination, in the sense that people don't think that people elsewhere can have the same technical capacity, the same education to be able to be smart enough to do these things. And I think that's really a point where we need to decolonize medical research and development. And I think this is a good place to start and to really put our trust more in these kind of collaborations.
Anybody else want to comment on technology transfer to developing countries?
I couldn't agree more with the statements that have been made by Sarai. Technology transfer to transfer the ability and knowledge of how to make these different products is happening now. And our own experience in Canada, working with many different facilities, it is challenging to transfer process and obtain the same overall parameters of a product. All facilities are different, and so in thinking about a technology transfer, it's very important to assess what these facilities look like, so that then we can adjust and manage what that technology transfer can look like, so that we can enable. But it's happening. It's happening now.
Mm-hmm. There's one point that I would like to raise now. I mean, opening up a little bit, and we have focused a lot on CAR-T because it's such an interesting example. But I was wondering whether there are other success, let's say, or maybe other failure stories on drugs that have managed to, I mean, innovative drugs that have managed to secure global access or not, and what could be learned from those experiences. Anybody want to comment on, I mean, other stories similar to the one we are discussing now, and whether they bring some interesting knowledge?
Sorry, my connection got cut a bit. Do you mind repeating the?
Yeah. I was asking about, I mean, we are focusing a lot on CAR-T, and whether there are other let's say, success stories of innovative drugs that have managed to find a public pathway or not, or maybe some failure story of drugs that could have gone. And here, maybe to give you some time to think, I would like to mention somebody that Ellen Thoen is commenting on the comment box, which is it would be strategical not to talk about the therapies as product, but rather therapies analogous to how the academic medical profession has developed therapies for a long time. This is something that I've heard from doctors in CAR-T that said, okay, we are really doing therapies, we're not doing a drug somehow. But anyway, just a parenthesis. So what about other examples? Adrian, anything in your mind?
I see that Stephanie has.
Okay, no? Stephanie, yes, please go on.
I was going to bring up the example of the TILs again, and there's been a great deal of work that's been done in the Netherlands with respect to TILs, and government-funded comparator studies, for example, of monoclonal antibodies directly against tumor-infiltrating lymphocytes in different indications. These TILs, having attended a presentation about a year ago with respect to how these are produced, they're particularly amenable to what we see in a traditional bone marrow transplant center. Right, there's heavy manipulation of the cells. Of course, the cells themselves come from isolated tumors from patients, and so it would appear to just make sense, right, to do these and make these in a hospital setting. That being said, we're seeing a divergence there too in how these products are being delivered, and a great example of that is in the United States, where there has been approval obtained this year with a company by the name of Iovance for a tumor-infiltrating lymphocyte product, where I think that the IP resides on the process, right? The process, the manner in which the TILs themselves are produced. So we're seeing two divergent approaches emerging on how this new therapy is going to be developed. But I think that's an arising therapy that will definitely, I think we may be talking about in about a year or two about the delivery of this therapy in a hospital setting.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. In fact, you have already answered to another question I had, which is, I mean, what other therapies are in the pipeline? If anybody has other thoughts about what's the next game, let's say, in which this public versus private debate, let's say, will appear, just tell me. Otherwise, I would like to ask you a little bit about policy, okay? So we have seen major changes, for example, major changes, important changes in the European regulation recently. I was wondering whether you have any thoughts of what regulatory framework could help the development of public pharma, if you have any specific, let's say, requirement that you would like to see in future regulatory frameworks on the topic. And also maybe if you have a comment on the current situation of hospital exemption in Europe, because that one seems to be the opposite, that is a regulatory decision that may hamper, in fact, the development of public pharma instead of promoting it, the fact of basically erasing hospital exemption. So any thoughts on regulation and how it could help or not?
I mean, if on the specifics of the EU negotiations and the challenges that certain interest groups are proposing to include in the hospital exemption clause, I think there's two things, right? There's two criticisms to the hospital exemption. The first one is that the interpretation by different member states is quite different, and that has an impact, and that's true. It's not quite straightforward how different countries interpret the regulatory pathway, and there should be a strengthening and harmonization of that. And I think the current drafts point towards that. However, there are several, as I said, interest groups that are trying to pose more barriers, such as defining very restrictive definitions of non-routine use, or not letting the use of hospital exemption when there is another product on clinical trial, not even approved on clinical trials elsewhere in Europe. So if Spain wanted to use RE1 in their context, it wouldn't be possible because there's another product for the same indication in clinical trials in Sweden, for instance. And that's the state of things. It seems like, and we're hopeful that doesn't happen at the end. And as I was saying in my presentation, I was hoping that at some point we will think that these norms around global accessibility and the inclusion of access conditions in R&D funding, the necessity to incorporate licensing practices that include equitable access beyond Europe are included in the legislation, right? The same way, there are some proposals to include access plans to obtain certain benefits related to AMR products. It would be interesting to see if that can be applicable to other areas. And I'll stop there.
Okay, Sarai, Stephanie, any wish for regulation?
Well, so coming from Universities Act for Essential Medicines, we always, of course, care about the university perspective within that. And we think that better access requirements on funding from the EU are definitely needed. So my wish would be around that to start with. And then one small thing about the next transformative therapy. So I don't really know what the next transformative therapy will be, but I think one thing that happens a lot at university hospitals is that we repurpose drugs that already exist, and we need to make sure that they are maintained in public hands, because there's often a capture of the intellectual property around it, or they try to repatent it. And I think that we should also look at in our drugs cabinet at things that we already have that we could reuse. But in terms of my wishes, it would be around access conditions, and within the hospital exemption, I think that's super important to promote public pharma and protect it further.
Thanks. Stephanie?
Yes. So as I've mentioned before, Canada does not have a hospital exemption pathway. We have found in our discussions with colleagues in Spain and understanding the incredible value that has been brought by the hospital exemption by being able to enable reimbursement of the product, so that the amount of data can continue to be collected and unlike us in Canada, where there's this constant hunt for funding to support our future efforts, they've been able to, they've really been able to move their program forward. And you can see it in how quickly they've been able to mobilize the number of different products that they're bringing to the clinic. So I would underscore it as a real success story. And something I think that really has to be carefully protected as you move forward in order to support this concept of public pharma.
So thanks a lot for your very interesting talk. I think it was a very practical and inspiring debate, because we really come out of it with a lot of examples and a sort of list, a checklist of things to think about. Thanks also to the audience. It has been a very vivid conversation. I hope I've been able to convey all your doubts and questions, or at least a large part of it. And yeah, so thanks a lot, and see you again soon, I hope.